the United States ethos when it comes to media freedom and a free press. And there is that sort of push and pull between government and media, which I think is a healthy thing and something that we want to continue to do, which is both to enjoy the free press and free press media environment that we have here in the United States, support it around the world. But at the same time, one thing that I wanted to maybe talk about and think about is from the perspective of those in the government, whether it's the US government or otherwise, trying to get what we call the truth out to the media and how they might perceive what that truth may be. So I want to give you a couple of examples to think about, and then a few thoughts on, what the maybe government or even what any of our roles are and how we can look at and determine the truth. Philosophically, truth is a quite deceptive and tricky thing to understand. From my own personal perspective, before I joined the State Department, I worked for a Japanese newspaper, and I would cover the State Department briefing every day. This was a while ago, and I remember going to the press conferences and going to the briefings, writing up my notes and thinking, oh, this is what I thought was the most important thing coming out of it, and then going back and reading the wire stories and having those wire stories have picked up one sentence from that press conference and had built a story around it. That sentence was not incorrect. That sentence was truthful. But to me, I always struggled a little bit, which is why I didn't make a good journalist and a better bureaucrat. And I respect both. That I thought that wasn't really the main point of that press conference, but that was their main point. And I use that example not to say that one way is wrong or right, but it's the challenge between those of us in the government who are attempting to share some stories and either good news, bad news, whatever, and not have our words be twisted, but have those words be used and focused on in different ways, and how that challenge may be. A more recent example may be the recent stories that came out with the U.S. ambassador to the UN, Ambassador Haley, it was about a month and a half ago, about the $60,000 that were being spent on her curtains for her home, and that became quite a media story for a moment. And I didn't know anything particular about it, but I know government procurement habits quite well, and I thought, no, this was procured quite a long time ago. And in fact, the truth was, yes, the curtains cost $60,000. Yes, they were for her home, but they were procured during the last administration, and there are security requirements that required, this procurement. And so that truth was there, and the question then becomes, what is the responsibility of the journalists, and what is the responsibility of those of us who read the media to decipher some of that truth? And that's a challenge. I think I would say in that case it was a bit of a manipulation of the truth, but it was true, and $60,000 does seem quite excessive for curtains. So all of those things are true, but ensuring that you have the full story, I think, is an important aspect of that. Jumping to the White House, this particular administration has had challenging times with the media, and I wanted to read a quote from a press briefing from last year that Sarah Sanders had said, and she was complaining about how, in her opinion, the media was not being truthful. There's a very big difference between making honest mistakes and purposefully misleading the American people. You can't say that it's an honest mistake when you are purposefully putting out information you know to be false, or when you're taking information that hasn't been validated, that hasn't been offered any credibility, and that has been continually denied by a number of people, including people with direct knowledge of an incident. Now, those are fairly strong words that she says, and I think that, in my personal opinion, maybe that there are some truthful elements in her statement on both sides, which is to say, with this increasingly partisan world that we live in, while journalists are supposed to be nonpartisan, sometimes editorial content or commentary can have some creep, whether it's even only in how the titles of articles are written or things like that. I think a more effective way to sort of engage media, and this is something that I've done myself when I've been overseas, pushing back on foreign media stories that were either blatantly false or were somewhat false, is to, again, always, in my opinion, truth does, in fact, ring true. It's quite a common statement to make, but any disinformation, your greatest tool against it is in fact to talk about the truth. And I think to go back to supporting media, to not look at journalists in a pejorative sense or in a confrontational sense, but rather to help support them. I'm a big fan of journalism schools and professionalization of the industry. With the rise of social media, citizen journalists are becoming quite common, and sometimes there are some challenges with citizen journalists that don't always understand that sort of framework of core ethics. And so one of the things that I think is very important is encouraging and ensuring that journalists do, in fact, adhere to those core ethics of accuracy, impartiality, humanity, transparency, and accountability, all of those things. And what struck me from the keynote speech this morning was this concept of the first artificial intelligence news anchor. And artificial intelligence, I don't know, can it be ethical? Can it not be ethical? When you're talking about artificial intelligence creating news, is it going to be more truthful because it doesn't have any of the human elements that we've talked about before? I'm not sure. I think it could be interesting. What I've seen, at least in terms of artificial intelligence in news anchors, tends to be something along the lines of business reporting, the stock market's going up, stock market's going down, with an editor with a final look at it. But if they're moving into actual news per se, it could be an interesting way of looking at if a computer can be purely accurate and purely impartial versus a human. I'm not sure. Let's discuss. I think maybe I'll end with that because I think it could be interesting to have a good conversation about some of these ideas and build on some of the ideas that we didn't get to talk about in the first session this morning, and sort of talk about these challenges from both sides. And I can see both sides since I've been on both sides. And the challenge of this concept of truth is a sort of mutable thing as well. But if we aren't here to talk about it, we won't learn from each other. So let's try to do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
A colleague of mine, Kambali Museveli, he represents an organization called Friends of the Congo. I've known him for quite a few years. Friends of the Congo represents the people of the Congo who are, obviously, many of you know, are going through some very, very terrible social upheaval. And it's being caused by both sides, both the rebels and the government. And Kambali presents himself to the United States as a spokesman for that organization. We want to get the story of those folks out so people understand the seriousness of the problems going on in the Congo. the lack of social structures, the lack of good governance, but also on the other hand, there's a terrible problem on both sides through the use of a lot of really, really terrible ways of conducting that conflict. The use of child soldiers, the use of rape as a tool of war. And Kambali's organization tries to get people to understand the seriousness of what's going on there and just get people organized so we can work towards a better tomorrow in the Congo.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to try it again. I'm trying to wake you up for a little bit. Going to be happening in the Congo this December if we will have elections. So hopefully we can learn from what's happening in the South and we may have free and fair elections. But to the topic of what we want to talk about, what is truth? I think the Congo is a perfect case where we can look at what is truth depending on who actually speaks about it. Probably the more complex things to understand about the Congo is when you hear the crisis in the Congo, it sometimes may sound as an exaggeration around the reality that actually people face there. So here are the numbers. Over 6 million people have died in the conflict. Half of the deaths are children under the age of 5. Hundreds of thousands of women have been brutally raped as a weapon of war, a strategy of war actually. Yet, when these numbers are mentioned, for example, I can use this room as an example, I have yet seen someone stand up when they heard these numbers. I have not seen someone feeling outraged by hearing these numbers, right? That it becomes as a footnote through even media reporting. It's this constant notes, like it's almost a copy-paste. As you look at the coverage of the Congo, you could see the same sentences copied over and over and sometimes described as a civil war. The United States has had a civil war. So one knows what a civil war is by using the most basic definition of what a civil war is. It will be a conflict within the people of the country, either for power or taking control of the power. But that is not what's unfolding in the Congo. Another misconception will be ethnic conflict. And usually, whenever I travel to the United States, I usually say that there is more ethnic conflict in the United States than is in the Congo. The reason being, the reason why I say that forcefully is that in the Congo we have over 300 ethnic groups. So when one say that there is an ethnic conflict, I'm always asking which ethnicity is fighting the other ethnicity, and in the millions of deaths, which ethnicity have died. So we know Congolese from many ethnic groups have been affected by the situation in the Congo. Then I think I touched on that point already. But now let's look at how we've done, why we are where we are today in terms of even how we look at the Congo as reporting. Tied all the way back to 1885. There is a gentleman named Joseph Conrad who visited the Congo. And as he left the Congo, he had good intentions. He wanted to make sure that he mobilizes the West Europeans to actually care about what was actually happening in the Congo. He was a member of the Congo Reform Association. So he wrote a book called Heart of Darkness. As the book has been written up until today, I do believe that people misunderstand what he actually tried to do. For those of you who have read it, whenever he speaks about, there is a section where he says, horror, horror, horror. It was a way for him to express the outrage of why people will not actually stand up to the massacre of Congolese at the time. But because of the conception that they created in 1985, up until today, Congo is seen as this dark place that has no analysis. There is no agency even of the Congolese to fight, because when you read Heart of Darkness, you are not actually hearing about the resistance of the Congolese under King Leopold. They resisted. You don't hear those stories. So this is what we have also struggled to break away that notion of what is Congo from the Western conception of what's actually what it is. Then let's move to 1960. I usually give one presentation in college, and I always make the joke, what would have happened if Lumumba had a Twitter account? Because we know what will happen if Donald Trump has a Twitter account. That it's a medium of communication that he could have used to share his views. about what was unfolding. But when we see what unfolded in 1960, from 1958 to 1960, the voice of those who mobilized for independence has never been presented in a very concrete way. We had young Congolese between the age probably of 20 to about 40 who mobilized to regain control of the country and gain independence peacefully without any weapon, and they were successful at it. But the footnote is always around the killing of Patrice Lumumba, which is important to know the context. But it stays at a higher level, where the United States, through the CIA, Belgium, and Congolese sycophants, killed Patrice Lumumba, the first democratically elected prime minister of the Congo. That's one level of actually what has unfolded at the time, which was an African undertaking of supporting the independence movement, looking at Kwame Nkrumah, who met Patrice Lumumba in 1958 and provided financial, human resources, and even military resources through the United Nations by having Ghanaian forces in the Congo in the 1960s. So it also depends on who actually is telling the story from which angle. Coming back now to the present, while we may speak about the tragedy of what's unfolding in the Congo, what is always missing is the potential of the Congo. If one knows what Congo could give to the world, or what Congo is giving to the world, you will fight to make sure that the narrative that's coming out of there is actually an analysis that people can grapple with. I do know, always say that the conflict in the Congo is not a complex issue, because if I can understand what's happening in Israel and Palestine, I can understand what's happening in the Congo. It just requires people to pay close attention to it. What are the potentials I'm talking about? Congo has the capacity to provide electricity to the entire African continent, Southern Europe, and have a little bit left for the Middle East, just by using the hydropower of its river, the Congo River. It has mineral wealth estimated at $24 trillion. I don't know if it's true, but if economists are using that number, what could that be as an engine of the development and the transformation of the African continent? We'll end, and I would like to engage also more in the discussion around media coverage engineering. So I was not trained as a journalist, but I remember when I left college, I was very frustrated with the coverage of the Congo. And I met a gentleman, he passed away, Les Brown, in 2008 in Chicago. And I challenged him and a few other journalists. I met them at the Unity conference. I don't know if you all are familiar with Unity. It happens every 4 years, usually election year. It's a conference of journalists of colors in the United States. And so he was there with a few journalists, and of course I was making my Congo pitch. And I challenged the journalists, including him, saying that you should cover the Congo more. You know, everyone is holding a cell phone. They should know that the mineral resources to make the cell phone comes from the Congo. It could be traced back there. And he did agree that the media does a poor job in covering the Congo, but he challenged me as a Congolese. I think it's up to the Congolese themselves. What can they do to become citizen journalists, to cover and provide information about the Congo? So if I tell you that the first publication that ever published me is called Dissident Voice, I doubt many people in this room even know what Dissident Voice is. It was a blog which I submitted an article and they published it. And from that, I was even surprised a few years ago, the New York Times reached out to me to submit an article. But it just took the courage of saying that I do not have to necessarily be someone who studied journalism to write, but I can write the story of the Congolese from the Congolese perspective and provide it there. When the keynote speakers was sharing the information, one thing hit me that sometimes we forget. We had a discussion on artificial intelligence, what algorithm can create, but we literally left the entire African continent from the discussion, right? Because the questions for me, when I heard that presentation, I said to myself, in the Congo, a country with less than 5% internet penetration, where most Congolese data is not yet, how can I say, mined, how will artificial intelligence affect us? I see it in two ways. One, the way the Western world will be affected by artificial intelligence will strengthen the narrative or the heart of darkness. Because if the content that's already there around what's happening on the African continent is already skewed, and this is what you're using to generate content for news, you will never know the reality of the people themselves. And two, the discussion around extractive industry, that artificial intelligence is not like a creation of God that comes out of thin air. It is generated by electronic devices, computers. To create that computer, you need raw materials. And to get that raw material, it has to come from the African continent. Africa is the last frontier. Specifically for the Congo being the #1 producer of cobalt, cobalt is essential to even the creation of unmanned vehicles today, the Teslas and others. What does that actually mean to the livelihood of the Congolese people, about the scramble of its mineral resources and how it directly affects the people? I will end by quoting Patrice Lumumba. The reason why I would like to quote him is before he died, he was able to write a letter to his wife, which is seen by many Congolese almost as a testament or a message that he left for the Congolese people. But there is a section in it that goes into citizen journalism, as I say, and the responsibility for the people affected by the media to start covering their own narrative. He said, history will one day have its say, but it will not be the history that Brussels, Paris, Washington, or the United Nations will teach, but that they will teach in countries emancipated from colonialism and its puppets. Africa will one day write its own history. It will be to the north and to the south of the Sahara a history of glory and dignity. And that's what I hope for Africans who are not journalists, who would like to hear the narrative do, is to pick up the pen, write the story, introduce the reality that the world does not know about the reality of your space. And I think I'll leave it there, and I hope we have a fruitful discussion on media and truth. Thank you.
Thank you. The president of International Center for Religion and Diplomacy, so I just got in touch with his office. They said he's in a mountain in Utah that he's having challenges with the internet connection because he was supposed to join us through Skype. So I guess we just get ahead. If he gets back to me, I'll let you know.
Okay.
Tom Garten from the UN Press Corps here down the street. I'd like to address a question, if I may, to Monsieur Kamale. Kambale, okay, I'm sorry. We have Mr. Carney's name. I know, but we were told he would send someone. You are the person who he has sent. About a dozen years ago, you may recall, I don't know where you were at that time, there was a very much discussed movie which was called, if memory serves me, Blood Diamond. And it had to do with the basic issue of conflict minerals in the Congo, particularly in North and South Kivu, which, for those who don't know your geography, is in the northeastern part of your country. What is your organization, what are your people in general doing to put, we haven't heard about this in a dozen years, or at least a decade. What are you doing to bring this back on the agenda of the world? And I should tell you, for whatever it's worth, I'm no expert, but I have in some small way visited your country. I've been to Kinshasa quite several decades ago, and I'm also, and I know I'm dating myself terribly, I'm old enough to remember the coming to independence of Congo and the death of Lumumba, and as we're always reminded over at the UN, the death of Hammarskjöld as well, which is to this day being investigated. What can you tell us about bringing your story and your nation's story and your war story to the attentions and the conscience of the world? Thank you.
during Barack Obama, there was a law called Dodd-Frank Act, the Wall Street Reform Act that was passed. In that law, there is a section in it, I think it's 1502, which is a conflict minerals provision, which is very interesting actually. It was Congressman McDermott who wrote it, and he was able to snack it in at the last hour whenever they were voting. So 1502 of the Dodd-Frank Act is a conflict minerals provision that requires for American companies who use gold, tin, tantalum, which is coltan, and
Coltan.
yes, coltan. So it's tantalum, tin, and gold, and there is one more mineral. They have to disclose the source of that information in their filing with the Security Exchange Commission. Surprising, I wouldn't say surprisingly, but forcefully, when that bill was initially written, I actually met Congressman McDermott in Seattle. I was against it. And the reason I was against it is I don't think they took into account the reality on the ground, because they looked at the crisis of controlling the mineral resources from the blood diamond perspective of the Kimberley process. It's much more complex than that, because I give you an example. If a coltan is coming out from a mine today that is conflict-free, next month it's not going to be conflict-free, because it changes hands. Sometimes it's the government that controls it, sometimes our rebels and others. Second, through many UN reports, it's been shown that rebels don't just make money on minerals. They make money on timber, fishing, they make money also on roadblocks, right, and ransom. So by...
What was the last?
Ransom, they'll kidnap people.
Oh, ransom, R-A-N-S-O-M.
Yes.
Thank you.
So what will happen, what was predicted, is by passing this law, there will be a de facto ban on Congo's mineral resources, which actually happened. That people stop buying these minerals from the Congo. But surprisingly, at the time that the de facto ban happened, Rwanda's export increased. At the same time exactly, right? So we knew this will happen, we knew it will have a negative effect, and we didn't think that by regulating mineral resources, you can resolve a political problem. Because the war in the Congo, while it's around controlling mineral resources, it's a war waged by US allies, Rwanda and Uganda. We invaded the Congo twice, in 96 and 98, and have continued to support proxy rebel militias. That's a political problem where the United States can do is to stop supporting dictators on the African continent, stop training the military at Fort Leavenworth or in some of the US military base, stop sending the weapons, right? But you can take a political problem and use a mechanism of tracing a mineral without actually holding the illegal trade. So that was the perspective. There are movement that's happening into the perspective. Our position has been continuing to provide the analysis to policymakers. Feingold followed some of those policies when he was the special envoy. I don't know if you listened to his last speech.
Feingold a number of times.
Yeah, so did you listen to his exit speech when he left his position as the special envoy? He quoted us in it. And to us was a message that he's been following what we were sharing around how the US could be engaged positively. But we work mainly around advocacy and putting pressure on the US government to change the policy, not just on the Congo, but the region, but stopping the support of dictators on the African continent.
Thank you.
You both mentioned artificial intelligence, so my question is to both of you. It touches on that issue. Everybody knows that there's a lot happening in AI, and everybody suspects it's going to have a big impact. It may already be having a big impact on many parts of society, including journalism and media. You mentioned some examples, but I've read recently of some examples in which industry has used AI for different purposes. It was one used within some sort of a search engine, which it turned out was scoring things, and it turned out any person of color got a much lower score in this system. There was another application that was being used to sort of vet job applicants, and it turns out women were all systematically relegated low scores. And so when we think about where we might go with AI, especially in the context of journalism, media, and governance, how much of a priority should it be on sort of hardwiring this on a policy level that ethics have to be an essential part of whatever AI systems are put in place, because they may wind up running everything. You know, somebody said, well, earlier today, how many of us use Google Directions to figure out how to get here? Well, you know, we all are taking orders from machines now a lot, right? And we're starting to trust them more than we trust people. So AI is behind a lot of that, or at least very clever algorithms. So where does it leave us, you know, is my question.
I have a slightly tongue-in-cheek answer, which is to say the government is remarkably slow to any sort of new technology. So I feel like sometimes the concerns people have about X or Y or Z when it comes to new technology often will be worked out in the business world before it eventually comes to the government. I'm being a little facetious there, but I think your point is valid. One good thing about the federal government is that everything we do, everything we write, everything we say, every email we send is FOIAble, you know, Freedom of Information Act. It's a very powerful tool. And oftentimes other countries, when we tell them we have this tool for, you know, not only journalists but normal human beings to learn information about how the government works, they're astounded. And not so many want to particularly adopt this concept. But I think that things like that concept of government transparency in the majority of federal government bureaus is, I think, going to be part of that leading toolbox in which people use when it comes to AI. And I think when it comes to how AI may be used, everything's, like it or not, in the U.S. government, everything's quite heavily regulated. So when you talk about how we intake applications, that system is supposed to be free and fair for everyone, as long as you have a computer, which one can argue that might be a challenge in and of itself. And it's true, especially with internet penetration, as you've talked about, in Africa and perhaps in some areas of the United States. That can be a challenge. But the idea is that everything should be free and fair and open. And I think, one good thing about the federal government is that we have that sort of check and balance with every new sort of large policy, this concept of notification to Congress. And that idea of how we want to change our work would be organized throughout the government, would be open to public comment, would be scrutinized by Congress. All of those things, while perhaps not making us the most speedy, do in fact allow it to be more transparent and something that I think is a positive thing. We work closely with a lot of course, businesses, whether it's Google or Facebook or others. We have these relationships, the federal government does. But in the end, we are responsible to the people of the United States and the Congress. And as a result, a lot of the things that we do in the federal government will be a lot more heavily regulated. How that impacts journalism is a different story. I was listening to the executive editor of the Washington Post last night. She was talking about how, I think it was since the turn of the century, since 1900, the number of people working in the field of journalism has been cut in half. And that's not because there's half as many people who are interested in it. It's just the business model is so difficult now. People can't get paid enough. There's a variety of reasons why that's the case. And so I worry that if we cede this space to AI, we do ourselves a disservice, because AI is smart, but people understand other people. And I think the core and key element to a good journalist is relationship building, getting people to talk off the record, and a computer can't make someone do that, can they? So, my thoughts.
Machine learning, artificial intelligence The problem that I see that's inherited with that is we bring our own bias and our own way of thinking, even in the creation of algorithm. In my other life, I'm also a developer. So one of the things that I've noticed when I specifically entered the tech world was, and understanding actually the people who have built it, they are usually between the age of 9 to about 30. In terms of the technology, understanding what is happening, and most of them are young white male who think in a very particular way. So for example, outside of even thinking about machine learning, what makes us think that in order for me to open an app, I have to use my finger and press a button for it to open, right? It's a particular way of thinking that has been, that all of us are being programmed to feel and think a certain way. Some of these young people also have raised the law, still very angry that a young man by the name of Fred Hammond is in a federal court prison in Illinois. And he was part of Occupy Wall Street, and he's one of the developers who leaked the information around Stratford spying on activists. Beside him, instead of even going all the way back to him, I can just speak about Ed Snowden. Snowden, a young, I think he was in his late 20s, working in Hawaii, was able to tell the American people about the danger of AI without people understanding. That's what he was saying. He literally told us that the United States government is accumulating data of the entire world, including American citizens, through the Five Eyes, using the relationship they have with Australia and some of the European countries, and are compiling it. The reason why the data was being compiled is to wait for the type of technology that can actually analyze the data that's there. And that is happening now. So we know the technology has been weaponized, because also 2 weeks ago, Tim Cook at the European Union made a speech telling the European Union about the danger of AI and that it can be weaponized. And some of the small examples, you say Google Map, right? Can you imagine that we as citizens are helping Google to build driverless cars without knowing? How many of you have ever seen that whenever you have a captcha on a website, a Google captcha that will tell you that to select street signs? I don't know if you have ever seen that. That you try to go to a page, it tells you, well, you have to go through this process, click everywhere you see a stop sign, click anywhere you see a storefront, and so on. Those images are actually being collected. We are providing the data for free to Google, but they are using it in the technology for the driverless car that Google does, because the power of AI, specific for those cars, is a car that's able to recognize a tree, a street sign, a light, is the technology that will be able to be sold or used for a company. And there is a movement in Europe to actually hold Google accountable to paying us for giving them that for free. So there are many problems with it, but we have to know there is an inherent bias, and then we have to make the conscious decision about, do we really need AI technology? Do we need map? I'm in Accra. Most of the people that I drive with never use Google Map to go anywhere in Accra. And they get lost and they talk to someone, I'm going this way and that way, right? So these are things that we can say, do we need this technology for everything? And when we make the conscious decision to check out of some of the basics, it will also shift what they are building for us to consume.
This one where certain people were denied loans, and that was sort of built into some algorithm, I assume, in order to isolate those people and then say, no, they're not going to proceed in the process. But that, I don't know, and again, I'm just raising a question, if that is artificial intelligence. To me, what it is that someone decided what the algorithm would be, and they decided to put in there, for whatever their reason was, that particular exclusion or whatever. So to me, that is not artificial intelligence. That's somebody consciously deciding that this is how we're going to process the data points. I was under the understanding, again, I may be wrong, someone may know more about this, that artificial intelligence was all of this information is available, let's say, to a computer. And then you're asking a computer to do something, and the computer decides what to do. That was the artificial part of it, which to me is very different than someone programming, in a sense, the algorithm. And I don't know if anybody has any insight on that or not. Yeah.
That's it.
Hello everyone, I'm Chidinma Shuke from Shuke Creations, Pace University, Rutgers University, and CUNY as well. I'm an educator, I'm a researcher. So I'm really into tech, I'm into business, I'm into economics, I'm into life and people. And I wonder about the role of education. I think most of us in here, really most of the world, I've been aware about the role of the U.S. government in political outbursts in other countries, in people, and the terms we use too, rebels, for example, the terms we use, I don't know if you like the word, in supporting those so-called rebels, and also about responsibility. How do we, as American citizens, police our government? When these things happen, we are aware of it. Before it's home, how do we police our government, okay? That's one point. The next point goes more with the computer science, artificial intelligence. Yes, we have all this data. We're giving the data for free to Google. We're volunteering all this data to Google. There's a lot of miseducation when it comes down to what artificial intelligence really is. How intelligent is artificial intelligence? Those that are in the field know that it is really not that intelligence. In many cases, you still need a human person to direct it. To answer your question, the data has to be trained. You have to train the data. Machine learning, it takes time to train the data for you to get it to do what you want it to do. So that algorithms takes time to develop. It's not necessarily automatic. You have to train it. It takes a lot of time to train it to get it to do what it does, okay? And you already pointed to it, Mr. Kearney, about the fact that you could use artificial intelligence as a weapon. So I wonder, since we are becoming a society, maybe not so much people in this room, but certainly as an educator who works with low case, but usually more older people, and even children in, kids, teenagers in high school, in terms of analytical abilities, we know that they are lacking because of the use of distance, by toddlers, use of, cell phones by adults, simply having a conversation in public with where's the direction. We are not doing that. So I wonder, why don't we think about the fact that you can actually train the computers, train the data, train the robots to have people only listen to the news you want them to listen to. So AI becomes a controlling tool by the media that though what you want to hear is what you hear. What you don't want to hear is what you don't want to hear. So we have a huge problem, a potential problem in our hands here. And also those in the government that are making these decisions, I do know that they do work with data scientists, educators, but how quickly are they working with these people? And how much respect are they giving to the experts in that field? And how integrated is the economics with the media, with the text, with the people on the street? How integrated is that system being accumulated, and used to help with media?
Okay. If I understood what you said, you're saying that somebody is training the data and sort of leading the computer in a direction of when it looks at the data and what the ultimate result is.
Yes.
So there is somebody doing that. It's not artificial that is doing that. There's somebody actually doing that. So the example in the loan, somebody would be leading it in the direction of the data of saying, we're going to exclude this group.
Yeah, exactly. So we're quite a good amount of years away from the research, okay? From having robots or systems that can automatically do things that are complex to just manipulate without human interaction or human interference.
Okay, you want to take that responding to or commenting on?
A triangular response. Using an example of corporations, I'll speak about just not naming, but one corporation uses a machine learning algorithm to go through their resumes. Because they get thousands of resumes and no human being can go through that. That's just the reality. I used to work for a tech company, and whenever that came up, while debating with some of the colleagues, I told them that I will never be hired at a company because of the criteria that is stipulated, right? I'm not a computer science graduate. I self-learned coding. I started I think around 1999, just fascinated coming to the United States. Here's a computer, here's an email. I was like, how do you create an email? I self-learned that. So if I self-learned that and the company that hired me gave me a very basic test of actually solving a bank problem, and of course they saw that we code, that's how I was hired. But the way they wrote the algorithm will literally remove a lot of people. So I won't say it's almost intentional, because the way I heard you was it's intentional, but I'm calling it that people bring in their bias around what they know. And that's the danger of AI today, because the data that it's consuming is biased in many ways, especially even with the reality of Africa. And then if you use AI to create news about Africa today, it's going to be crazy, because it will not know the nuance, because the journalists do not do their homework. They're not, it's not that they don't do their homework, they copy paste too much, and they don't provide proper analysis, and there are a few who do. So that's just my contribution on that.
Okay.
I didn't want to go through.
A few thoughts on what you were talking about, and I think, you're out. Let's try this again. Can you hear me? Well, I have a pretty loud voice. I'll just talk. People have said I should be on the stage. You can hear me all the way back there. Now you can hear me. I think you've sort of hit the nail on the head in a couple of topics, especially as it relates to sort of this concept of fake news and media literacy. And I think, our system of education is set up in such a way that states are responsible for each of the educational systems of the children in their state. But what I've seen over the past couple of years is an increasing interest in education to increase media literacy. When I was a kid, we did have a concept of it. I had to go home and watch the news, and I got extra credit for watching one of the major channels. I used to watch Dan Rather for whatever reason. I liked him. He seemed pleasant, and I'd write up what the news was of the day, because there were only 3 channels, and that's what we did for sort of news and media literacy. And what I've seen, and particularly in California, there's at least 1 or 2 counties in California that have now passed rules that their students must take a course in media literacy. There are a lot of organizations that have been very vocal now in how to teach young people how to look at the news, and it's very exciting and fun. And studies seem to show that if you can catch students up to 5th or 6th grade and teach them these habits, then they're sort of ingrained for life. And so the idea of how you can look at news in a critical and unbiased way is, I think, a very important thing for everyone in the world. I myself personally have a very fascinating news feed, which includes Fox News, CNN, Washington Times, New York Times, LA Times, The Guardian, because they also have very good reporting on the United States, and others, because I don't want to get into that media silo that you talked about. But what I've really seen, I think, over the last 2 years is the bombardment of media has led those people who are interested to become better educated, and those people who are maybe less interested to stop watching the news altogether. And I think that's equally dangerous, and that's something that I don't think is good for anyone. I've spoken to a lot of people anecdotally in which they say, I've just stopped watching the news, as if that's going to make the news go away. It does in their world, and while I understand that, I think a lack of an educated population is also something that's dangerous for any country around the world. So how to find a way in which we can depoliticize the news, which should already be relatively depoliticized, but how can we find a way to educate people to look critically, whether it's looking at original sources. I myself do that. Not everybody has that time, I know, but I do it for my own, self-interest and interest as well. I think this idea and concept of the bias in education and coding is actually a very interesting thing. And the idea that there's only one way to do coding seems to sometimes be ingrained, right? This is the way we do it because it's science and it's math and there's only one way. And I love this idea of, turning that on its head and saying, no, a button doesn't have to mean anything. A button might mean press it to the left. That's where innovation comes from. And that's why I think it's so important that we have women and people of color in STEM, that there is support for that, both here in the United States, but around the world. I think that there's some wonderful things going on throughout the continent in Africa that are very vibrant. When you don't have huge ability to get to computer sources, you become very creative. And that sort of creative energy and that creative vibrance, I think, can lead to great breakthroughs in interesting ways. And were I someone in tech and had some money, that's where I would put some money. Because I think that's where the future could be in sort of breaking through and having some innovation. So continue to talk about it, continue to pressure people, continue to pressure the government to include these sorts of things, because I think all of those things are important.
Not to generalize, but we know many people have a very, very cynical view of the government. When it comes to, for example, what you talked about, the curtains, I'm going to get into that. We know, we always hear these stories, the Air Force ordered a mic.
No, this one's closer.
Jesus Christ. The Air Force.
I'm sorry, Robert. Your microphone is on?
No.
No. Behind you, George. If you could ask her to
Press
shut
the
off
button,
mic.
turn it off.
Okay. Take this away.
The Air Force, we know, has an issue now, with $400 coffee makers. We've heard of $6,000 wrenches. When a situation came up like the curtains, where we understood that those curtains had to be $60,000 because they were a necessity for our apartment due to security reasons, whether the fabric was bulletproof, whatever. Versus something like where we have a situation with the Interior Secretary who bought a how many $1,000 science booth because he had secure communications about national parks. They're two different sides of that same coin. My question to you is this. In a situation where there's obviously positive reasons why we had to spend that kind of money, how would you get that story out so people would understand it? And maybe that would, I don't know how many people would convert, but at least would allow there to be a more balanced presentation. I mean, when I heard this, $60,000 curtains, I thought of Nancy Reagan in the China, if you remember. I mean, obviously what you're saying to me today makes complete sense. I live in New York, not too far from here, and I know she's in an apartment up in Turtle Bay, and we don't know who could try to shoot into her apartment, etc. So it made sense what you just said. But how would you get that out and say it has to be told, this is not the reason why we're spending this kind of money. It's for a practical security reason.
Sure. Every time we sort of get a story like that, there's a calculus. In this way, Ambassador Haley did make a few statements through Twitter. I don't think she actually didn't do an actual press release. And the question you have to ask yourself is, as I understand, to the original story, they did go back to that journalist and say, you know, you didn't actually convey this in the proper way. And so you have a few options when you have a story like that. And the question you have to ask yourself is how important is it that that this story get out? In other words, let me give you a different example which might make more sense. I remember when I was in Pakistan, there was an article in the newspaper which basically said 9/11 was perpetuated by the US government. I have strong feelings about that. So I called up the editor of that newspaper and said, you will publish my letter to the editor, which basically is explaining why it was inappropriate for you to publish this other article. It was not, by the way, an op-ed, it was an article, and explain why. So that's the strongest way. You can go out and you can say, you can give a press conference, you can push back, you can do a variety of things. In this case, I'd say I think she sort of thought, this is a ridiculous story. I don't know why you're covering it. Do what you have to. I'm going to make my statement, and then I'm done. I don't need to say anymore. And so I think that's where that situation comes into play. I spend a lot of time with friends explaining the U.S. government. I'm like, well, technically that's true, but there's always something there, and your point is always valid. I mean, I'm perfectly content, for people to say yes, this is what it costs. But if you have a problem, please bring it up with your congressman, and maybe we can get a new GSA contract that would reduce the cost of the toilet seats that we have to buy because it's through a contract or this or that or whatnot. It kind of goes back to some of my points earlier, which is I of course am a federal government employee, and I believe in the value of people-to-people engagement. That's why I work for the State Department. But some of the rules and regulations, we could be tighter. I would love to do that, and we constantly search for that. Whether it goes to fraud and mismanagement is a different story. But like any bureaucracy, there could be tightening, I think, as well. And so, but particular to your question, particular to your case, is if it's something that will strongly, at least with the State Department, for example, would strongly harm U.S. interests overseas with a large audience, then we would push back and give a press release, give a press conference, ensure that the right story was out there. If it's something that we don't want to use our valuable sort of media capital on, we might have a different posture and might simply have a tweet which says this is ridiculous, or this is this, or this is that. I think in her calculus, in her case, she was dealing with a lot of issues at that time, including Syria and some of the issues with Rohingya and others, and she wanted to focus on what she thought was more policy points rather than this. And I think it ended up, in my opinion, ended up looking better for her and not so good for the original article writer in that case as well. So there's different ways, but I always, I would always say, if you think something doesn't look right, bring it up and say something. I mean, that is the role of media, right? But do your homework and make sure you fact check first.
Thank you.
To the gentleman from the Congo.
Your microphone, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. To the gentleman from the Congo. I learned just last week that through my Ancestry.com analyses that I am 34% a lot of DNA from the Congo, which was a huge surprise to me. And so the statistics that you cited, I didn't stand up immediately and say, but it resonated. I just wanted you to know that. But the thing that I wanted to say to you is you started out your talk referencing a book, The Heart of Darkness, written in the 1900s. It occurs to me that if that is the reference that there's something wrong. Anything from the 1900s in the century of the 21st century should not be dictating how the country or anything is being viewed, the lens through which it is being viewed. And that's unfortunate. So that, the statement that you made that Patrice Lumumba had in his last letter to his wife, saying that the people of the Congo would tell their own story someday. To me, that is critical now. The bad news out of the Congo is fodder for the media, because the media audiences, they like bad news. I mean, we like bad news, unfortunately. And on the internet, bad news, fake news, travels 6 times faster than the truth. So it's incumbent upon the Congo to balance that out with good news, with the truth. So I would say to you that if the good people of the Congo are not investing in public relations on a consistent basis and imagery through advertising that shows the positiveness of what is there from our country, it's needed.
When it comes to the Congo, at least at Friends of Congo, what we do is we try to share the story of the resistance. And I always use the Palestinian example. When we think about the crisis in the Israeli and Palestine conflict, that I am always touched by the courage of the Palestinian for the story to be heard, even with the horror that exists, right? Now, taking back to the Congo, when I'm even speaking about the Congo, we have to talk about the crisis from the prism of agency and the resistance of the people, while also showing the beauty, because the danger of only showing the beauty is for people to think that everything is okay there, and they will not go to action. And we have examples of people who did that. William Shepherd, the first African-American Presbyterian missionary to the Congo. He heard about the Congo. He was actually here in the US in Alabama. Took a boat for 3 months, went to the Congo, saw what was going on, took a lot of pictures of what King Leopold was doing, came back, was still touring the United States, talking to people about what was happening there. He mobilized other African Americans. His wife, Lucy Gant Shepherd, she's the first person to ever translate the Congolese language into English. She translated Chiluba. She heard him, they got married, they went back to the Congo, and she was living there. There is another lady, which I found her story fascinating. Her name is Maria Fearing. She was a free slave. She didn't go to school until she was in her 30s. And when she went to school, she went after Emancipation Declaration. When she went to school, she was in class with teenagers. Sometimes they'll laugh at her, but she would be in the class and she became almost as the mother of the class. When she graduated, she was teaching mathematics and I think English. She heard William Shepherd when she was in her 50s. She heard him speak when he came to the college. I'm forgetting the name, I can't send you the detail of the name of the college. She was shocked to hear that after the Emancipation Declaration, there was a place called Congo where the United States, through Grover Cleveland, was supporting King Leopold to get access to the rubber that was used in the bicycles and the cars, the tires of the cars. She asked him, how can I help, right? And he said, come to the Congo. No, she's a teacher, she doesn't have a salary, she does not have much. You know what she did? She actually thought about it for 2 years. And then she decided, she sold her house, took the money from the sale of her house, and moved to the Congo with William Shepherd. She was actually living in the Kasai region. And she created a home, and that's something that sometimes people forget. When we talk about King Leopold, there was something that's happening in the Congo, the Arab slave trade. Right? And that was one of the reasoning of King Leopold to take control of the Congo. But what she was doing, Maria Fearing, is she was saving some of the young girls who were being kidnapped by the Arabs who came from the east in the Congo. And she would go, she would buy them and bring them to the home that she had. Her story is fascinating, right? But when I'm saying that, like whenever I go and speak, I share those stories about what people have done before. In 1960, Dave Chappelle's mother came to the Congo working with Patrice Lumumba. The Inga Dam project, she's the one who actually got the project to draft it to get funding to build the dam. She met Lumumba in her 20s here, first at Howard University, when he spoke there, coming to meet Dwight Eisenhower, and then he came to New York, and when he was in New York, met Dave Chappelle's mother's parents, and told her to come to the Congo. And I can go on even on Mother's Day, that the struggle of the Congolese is not just the conflict, it's the resistance. And explaining to people, as you say, you look at the ancestry that I got the DNA test, 1 out of 5 African Americans came from the Congo. That's a statistic that the census in the United States know, right? And for me, I'm saying it's important for all of us to understand, why is it this place in the heart of Africa? Since the Portuguese came in the 1400s, when they first came, and of course after that, why is it that place has always been a place with no stability? I believe because it's the heart. And if it is free, it's liberated, it's gonna help all of us, it's gonna transform all of us. But as long as you stay in a state of chaos, you will not be. And that's the message, at least, that we try to bring and say, yes, there is a crisis, there is a conflict. Here, what the young Congolese are doing in the struggle around the elections, many of them have died. I didn't even speak about a friend of mine who's been in jail since last year. He's in jail, no charges, detained by the Secret Service in the Congo. But why is a young Congolese in jail? You know, because he's been standing up. He's not the only one. There are many others who want to see a new Congo. But how do we get the story there? And it goes to the discussion around media. I think what we did not emphasize much on was alternative media, because we still can talk about the major media of the New York Times and the Washington Post, which has become much more commercialized. How much funding is the NPR getting to be continuing to provide us proper analysis? Are they small outlet that's still covering, you know, are we watching Democracy Now! To hear all the narrative? Like, what is the alternative media that people can go to get proper information beyond the mainstream media that sometimes may not have the interest in covering what's happening on the continent and in the Congo?
Thank you.